Good morning. So we're going to finish off, or actually we're going to begin building our macroeconomic model, which is the balance of all the demand in the economy, which is our aggregate demand, which is all the demand coming from our four major sectors of the economy: consumer spending, business spending, government spending, and spending from our trading partners and what we buy from them, and our nation's total sales, which is aggregate supply. So we're going to look at putting these two sides of the markets together. And once again, we will end up with an equilibrium price level and an equilibrium level of national output or national income, or another way of measuring that would be our real GDP. So let's get started on building our models. Okay, so this I'm sure looks kind of familiar. Similar to our micro framework, we have our supply, we have our demand. However, we're not talking about supply and demand of a particular good or a particular industry. We're now talking about supply and demand in terms of our overall economy. That is why we have aggregate demand and we have aggregate supply. And on our price, on our y-axis, we don't have price anymore, but we have price level. And on our on our x-axis, we have output, and in terms of our overall output in our nation, it is going to be our GDP. So let's just move on to the things that will shift our supply curve or our demand curve. We're going to start with our supply curve first, because in macro, we're not going to be dealing with much of the supply side as the demand side, at least not in this course. When we move on to policy of how our policymakers, i.e. the government or the central bank, how they can influence the economy, they don't do it on the supply side, but they do it on the demand side. So really, our focus moving into macro is mainly about the demand side, which is aggregate demand versus aggregate supply. But let's just talk about our aggregate supply and just explain, why our short-run supply curve is upward sloping and why our long-run supply curve is vertical. So we just need to kind of get that out of the way here. So our supply side, the difference between our micro framework and our macro framework is that in macro, when we're dealing with supply, there are actually two time frames. There is the short run and there is the long run. And our short run supply curve is shaped differently than our long run supply curve. So our short run supply curve pretty much looks like the supply curve right here. So anytime you see AS for aggregate supply, we implicitly just are assuming that this is our short run supply curve. So our short run supply curve is upward sloping. And if you think about our economy and if you think about the production of any good, it is based on short run variables. It is based on short run conditions. Long run is more of a measure of how much the economy can produce if everything was working at its full capacity. So I'll get into that in a sec. So our short run supply curve right here is upward sloping. And the reason why it's upward sloping, once again, if you remember I think in lecture 1, when we were talking about long run and short run, and the interaction between our factors of production in the short run and in the long run is very different. So let's just go through that again. So remember, in our in terms of our factors of production, we have our land, labor, and capital. So we have our short run, I'm just going to call it HSR, and our long run. So remember that in the short run, that is what dictates output today. So if you own a business, it is your short run supply of land, labor, capital that determines how much output you're able to produce. It's not your long run. It's not what could be. It is what you have today. So remember, in our short run, we are not able to change land that quickly, because that would entail, let's say if you were to own a restaurant, that would entail you, moving into a larger space, or it would entail that you maybe expand your restaurant. Not that easy to do overnight. And also capital is also not that easy to change in the short run. So once again, the only thing that we can change to change output is how much labor we're able to employ. In the long run, we're able to change everything. Okay? Now, if we are working in the short run scenario, which is right here, then there is going to be a certain there's going to be a certain impact in terms of average costs. So if we think about the short run, so let's say you're a business owner, and let's say once again you own a little coffee shop, and your coffee is very popular. You always have people lining up to buy your coffee. So in the short run, remember, the only thing you can do to increase output, you can't increase land and you can't increase capital. So in order to increase output, the only way you can do it is to increase your labor. Okay? But as you increase your labor and your land is fixed and your capital is fixed, eventually what's going to happen is your average output per worker will start to decline, right? Because you can only hire so many baristas, you can only hire so many servers before your cafe gets too crowded. And when it gets too crowded, average output will start to decline. And when average output starts to decline, what you are going to see is that average cost will start to increase. And if average cost starts to increase, well, you as a business, in order for you to keep increasing your output, that means the only way you're going to be enticed to increase output is to increase your prices. Now, if everybody in the economy, not everybody, if all businesses in the economy has this type of relationship in the short run between average cost and output, and therefore prices, then the only way that business owners would be willing to increase output is by raising prices. So that is why our short run supply curve, so I'm going to call this price level, and this is Y, or real GDP, Y being national income, and our short run supply curve is upward sloping, because if we want to increase output, say from Y0 to Y1, business owners will only be enticed to produce more output if prices go up, and because they need to be compensated for their increase in cost. And that is why our supply curve is upward sloping. Okay, so similar, if we were to look at the factors that shift our short run supply curve, this is very similar to the factors or the determinants that we have seen in the micro framework. And I would say that anything that affects a company's profitability will shift the company's supply curve. It's pretty simple. An increase in input costs, so wages, your ingredients, oil prices, the price of any commodities will start to affect a company's supply, because if your expenses have increased, you're not going to be able to produce as much. The other thing that will shift the short-run supply curve will, of course, be productivity, because productivity at the end of the day will affect a company's average costs. So if a company's average cost goes down, then obviously they're going to be able to produce more output. So here's just an example of the short-run supply curve shifting left. All right, so now moving on to our long-run supply curve. Remember, the long run is a period of time where companies are able to change all their factors of production. So if you want to change the size of your building, if you want to expand or contract your business, if you want to change the number of workers you want to hire, the long run is a period of time where you can change all your factors of production. So if we assume that in the long run that all companies are able to change all levels of all their factors of production, then it would make sense that companies would be operating at a level where they are at full capacity. They shouldn't be operating in a place where there's a lot of unused capacity, and they should also not be operating at a place where they need to expand. So the long run, if we believe that all companies have hired all their factors of production and they're all using them at their what we call their maximum capacity of utilization, that all their office buildings, that all their desks have a person working there, all the machines are working at their normal capacity of utilization. There's no excess capacity, and there is no shortage of capacity. That means that if all companies in our economy is operating at full capacity, then our long run supply curve should dictate the maximum output that an economy is able to produce. So our long run supply curve pretty much is vertical, and it's vertical, and we call that the amount of output that is dictated by our long run supply curve, we call that Y star. And Y star, we call that potential output. So basically, it is almost like a measure in our economy that when we assume that all companies are producing at Y star, then that is the maximum output an economy should be able to produce. Because we assume that after all companies have made adjustments in all their factors of production, well, you should be using all your resources at its full potential. You're not going to expand, so you're going to have unused equipment. Okay, you're not going to move into a larger restaurant to have half your restaurant empty. It doesn't make sense. The only reason why you would ever expand your business is because you would expect that many more customers and that much more output. So our long run supply curve dictates our maximum or our full potential GDP or output in our economy. So if you think about that, our Y star is kind of like our full potential. It's our max. We can produce in the short run above Y star, but you can't produce beyond Y star long term. Y star will expand, and how does our Y star or our potential output expand? Well, it can expand through an increase in any of our factors of production. An increase in land, an increase in labor, an increase in capital will shift our long run supply curve to the right. And that actually is equated to economic growth. When an economy is able to increase their potential output, it pretty much means that our potential output or our GDP is growing. Now, here's one caveat. So you just need to think that your long run supply curve really is the dominant supply curve, which means that our long run supply curve, if that shifts, our short run supply curve will shift in the same direction. However, when our short run supply curve shifts, it will not necessarily shift our long run supply curve. So the other caveat here is that the things that shifts our short run supply curve would be, for example, the change in the price of our factors of production. So if wages go up, you're going to expect our short run supply curve to shift to the left because it's gotten more expensive for the average company. However, price of inputs do not shift our long run supply curve. Our long run supply curve only shifts from a change in our real variables. And our real variables are the things that actually affect how much output an economy is able to produce overall. Okay, so that is just one caveat just to mention here.